Hey guys, welcome back to the program. Today we're going to be talking about my vintage Fangoria collection. Now, I collected Fangoria from sometime in 1993, pretty consistently till about 1999, 2000, and then would just pick an issue up here and there. And it was such an incredible resource for me, especially in that pre-internet world, where it was the only way I could find out about upcoming movies, and they would have these amazing interviews with makeup artists and actors. And it was just a really interesting time for horror movies too, because in the early to mid 90s, I don't know if there was a time that horror was less commercial and less mainstream. So it also kind of let me know there must be other people out there that like this, right? All right, so let's have a look. I know I said I started collecting in 93, but I occasionally sent away for some back issues, and this is issue 85 from the summer of 1989. And what's so interesting about reading some of these old issues is how frank some of the interviews are with the creatives. I mean, there's an interview with Joe Dante in one of these where he's talking about, he's in the middle of making Gremlins 2, and he's just openly taking shots at the executives at Warner Brothers, talking about how they only want the same old thing. And it was just amazingly refreshing to see. I don't know, you would never see that today. The very next issue, Freddy getting another cover story, poor Jason relegated to the corner. Issue 86. Issue 100 from 1991, I think. So occasionally, Fangoria would publish a magazine completely dedicated to one movie. And as you can see, this is for Jason Goes to Hell. I have Kane Hodder's autograph on here, along with Tony Timpone. He was the editor of Fangoria for a long time. I met them at it's kind of like a Halloween festival that happened in Massachusetts. It was called Spooky World. I don't know if that's still around anymore, but yeah, that was a good time. Issue 125, August 1993, Jason Goes to Hell cover story. This came out on my birthday, on my 11th birthday, I want to say. And yeah, I was there that weekend. Issue 127 from October of 93, Return of the Living Dead 3 cover story. I remember I couldn't wait for that movie to be released on video. And there's just so many amazing articles, like this article on The Crow. This was probably only a few months after Brandon Lee died, so they were really trying to figure out what they wanted to do with that movie. November 1993, issue 128, Pumpkinhead 2 cover story. This is just such a perfect example of what was going on in horror at the time. I mean, look at this. You have Man's Best Friend. That was like a killer dog movie. I actually saw that in theaters. And it's just a perfect example of how horror movies in the early to mid 90s, they were more cult movies than they were horror movies. They had very little commercial appeal, but I loved it. Issue 134 from July 1994. And this is a good example of how big stars were occasionally appearing in horror movies, but they were usually gothic retellings of older horror movies. I think Bram Stoker's Dracula was kind of the kickoff for that. And then you had, Jack Nicholson in Wolf, which was essentially a retelling of The Wolfman. This is a big one, issue 137 from October 1994. Wes Craven's New Nightmare cover story. I was there opening night with my grandfather. Most of these movies I saw with my poor grandfather. Obviously, I couldn't get in with my friends usually. So my grandfather would take me, and I remember he enjoyed this one. He usually didn't, believe it or not. And of course, Wes Craven's New Nightmare gets its own issue. Most of these magazines are in pretty good shape considering they're like 30, 25 years old at this point. And these movie magazines had posters inside, but I did take the posters out and put them on my wall as a kid. It was hard finding merch back then. I mean, today you could find anything you want related to these movies pretty much, or order it online. But back then you had to get creative. Issue 138 from November of '94. Another good example of, big stars appearing in gothic horror movies. You had De Niro in Frankenstein, Tom Cruise in Interview with the Vampire. Lots of interesting stuff happening at this time. Lord of Illusions, Ed Wood. Most of these movies I saw in theaters or definitely caught up with them on video. And it's so funny, today I scroll through Netflix and I see dozens of these horror movies that were made in the past couple of years, and I have no idea what any of them are. Okay, issue 147, October 1995. Now, this issue I might dedicate a whole episode to. I'm thinking about doing that, doing like deep dives into some of these issues, because there's a lot to dig into. I mean, obviously, the story behind Halloween 6, it could be its own feature-length documentary. And this is one that me and my friends actually did get in to see on opening night. And I have some stories. Issue 150 from, I think this is March 1996. It's interesting. The Crypt Keeper was probably the most recognizable horror figure of the mid 90s. And I feel like he's been all but forgotten. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're of a certain age, do you even know who that is anymore? And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think there's all kinds of rights issues with Tales from the Crypt. That's why Tales from the Crypt isn't on HBO Max, which is a real shame because that show is amazing. But yeah, it's too bad we don't see more of this guy. Issue 153 from June of 1996. We got the Craft cover story, Thinner, The Frighteners, The Relic, Escape from LA. Wow, what a lineup. Also from the summer of '96, this is the Crow City of Angels movie magazine. Issue 189, January of 2000. At this point, I was probably just picking these up here and there. Just had other things on my mind at this point, like where I was going to go after high school. Issue 214. So this would have been July of 2002, Halloween Resurrection cover story. And from the summer of 2003, Freddy vs. Jason movie magazine, another one released on my birthday, and of course, I was there for this. This one actually still has the posters intact. I think I was going to school in New York at this time, so I don't know if my roommates would have appreciated me putting Freddy and Jason posters on the wall. All right, guys, so that's my entire vintage Fangoria magazine collection that I have with me. Of course, I have like a stack like this in storage back home. But if you like what you saw here, let me know, because I am planning on doing some deep dives into a few of these issues because I have some good stories to go along with them. So let me know what you think.